Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Effects of the COVID-19 Crisis on Background Screening. My name is Heidi Clemens, Business Development Solutions Engineer at AccuSource, and I will be your moderator today. Today's webinar will be divided into two segments. First, we will offer a presentation outlining how recently enacted safer at home orders and social distancing practices in response to the COVID-19 pandemic have impacted both our organizational operations and the background screening process. Then, during the second segment, our presenter will be joined by two subject matter expert panelists to answer direct questions live from our webinar attendees. Attendee questions may be submitted using the questions pane on the webinar panel, both during the presentation and the panel discussion. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce today's presenter, Cynthia Woods, who's AccuSource's Vice President of Sales and Marketing. Cynthia has over 20 years of experience in the human resources services industries, including 16 years in employment background screening. Prior to her current role at AccuSource, Cynthia held positions managing business development, enterprise account management, partner relations, and marketing. She has also held leadership and major market roles in staffing and payroll. In her current role, Cynthia is responsible for overseeing AccuSource's sales, account management, and marketing teams. Cynthia holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Management degree and a Master of Business Administration degree from University of Phoenix. She is also a longtime member of the Society for Human Resources Management, SHRM. I'd also like to welcome today's panelists. First, we have Nancy Golden, AccuSource's Vice President of Operations and Compliance. Nancy has worked in the background screening industry since 1992, joining AccuSource team as a Director of Client Relations in 2017. Throughout her career, Nancy has held multiple high-level client-facing operational positions for top employment screening companies. During her tenure with these companies, her responsibilities included overseeing client relations, strategic account planning, and operations management. Nancy is a results-driven manager who specializes in process optimization, performance quality, and service excellence. She is solution-focused and partners with clients to develop screening processes and strategies to meet unique needs. She is highly experienced in implementation planning, account management, and service level agreement alignment. Nancy is a member of the Professional Background Screening Association, PBSA. Also joining us is Jennifer Damon, AccuSource's Director of Compliance and Chief Privacy Officer. Jennifer graduated from the University of Akron School of Law with a Doctor of Law degree and has over 10 years experience in the background screening industry. She is an experienced compliant professional with knowledge from both the employer and consumer reporting agency sides. Jennifer is responsible for AccuSource's compliance department, including federal, state, and local legislation changes and industry accreditation. Additionally, she oversees the quality assurance process. Again, please use the questions pane on the webinar panel to submit any attendee questions, both during the presentation and the panel discussion. Now I will turn over the presentation to Cynthia.
Thank you, Heidi, and special thank you to all of our attendees today for joining us. We understand that this is probably a very busy time in your duties as far as managing human resources and/or security, and we greatly appreciate you taking time out of that busy schedule to spend an hour with us today to review background screening. So first thing today I'd like to cover is our agenda. In our agenda today, AccuSource, we're going to go ahead and cover AccuSource's business continuity statement, COVID-19 crisis impacts on the background screening process, standard processing procedures at AccuSource, COVID delay notification process, assistance for essential service providers. And finally, we're going to conclude with the panel discussion with both Nancy and Jennifer. So AccuSource developed their business continuity plan quite a few years ago. However, we recently did a major update to it, probably in about the end of 2018. And one of the reasons why we found it so necessary to do a major overhaul of that program is because A, technology had come forward quite a bit, B, our company had grown significantly, and C, we had recently experienced a couple of major national disasters or major natural disasters in California, being the fire and the earthquake that we both experienced in 2019. And we felt like it was time that we overhauled our business continuity plan. We're very, very thankful that we chose that time to do that, because it greatly assisted us in meeting the needs of our clients and acting swiftly when we were met with the COVID crisis. So immediately upon notification that there had been a declaration of national emergency, AccuSource we basically enacted our business continuity plan. We were able to ensure that there were no interruptions and no delays in service to our clients related to COVID-19 by quickly and swiftly moving all of our in-house staff to off-site locations where they could work in a secure location that they were isolated from others during their workday, and they would have no threat posed to them of exposure to illness. And we were able to execute that within 3 business days of the actual declaration of national emergency. We were able to facilitate all of our operations through a cloud-based server network. We were already processing almost all of our operations through that network prior to the COVID crisis. So all of the same security controls, all of the same layers of protection for data at rest and data in transit that we've always been able to provide to our clients, we're able to provide through that network. And in addition to that, we do have some key services or some key functions that we do need to do from our corporate office. And so we've actually been able to enact a staggered schedule where we have individual staff members coming in on a rotating schedule to handle those tasks. Each time a staff member comes in and they work at a particular station to complete a task, that station is then fully cleaned and sanitized to ensure that there is no possibility of transmission of disease to the next worker that comes in and facilitates a duty. AccuSource is open for standard business operations during normal business hours, Monday through Friday, 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. During our normal business hours, all of our standard services and support is available to clients. We have live staff available to meet all of those support needs at the same levels that we had pre-COVID. In addition to that, we have online resources available as well for our clients. So our online system InstaScreen is still up, functioning, and accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, as is our website and our chatbot. If you haven't had an opportunity to utilize our chatbot yet on our website, I invite you to do so. The chatbot is supported by artificial intelligence. It can answer a wide range of questions for you in an instantaneous manner. If it is posed with a question that it doesn't have an answer to based upon previous questions that were asked or its developed memory, then it basically sends a message to our team. If it's during normal business hours, you will get a response very quickly from a team member reaching out to assist you with that need. If it is outside of normal business hours, then the first team member that is back on when our business hours start again, then that person will take that question and reach out to provide support. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about how some of our screening services potentially could be impacted by COVID-19. So a few of the external impacts of COVID-19, as we've already just explained how we are handling things internally. On one side of this graph is a list of all of the non-impacted services. Those include all of our standard online researches, including the Social Security trace, credit reports, motor vehicle records. Also, a wide range of our criminal products are still fully functioning. In addition to that, social media screening, debarment databases, etc. There are a few services that have potential, not guaranteed, but potential impacts due to some COVID shutdowns. Those searches that might be potentially impacted are your county criminal searches, employment verifications, education verifications, and professional references. So here's a high-level overview of our online resources in respect to criminal record searches, and I'll kind of focus in on criminal records, our criminal records first. So our federal records, National Criminal Database, statewide criminal databases and repositories, sex offender records, and a wide range of our county criminal records are all available through direct online criminal access. And that means that we do not have to interact with the courts or human at those courts to facilitate those searches, so they are not impacted by the by any COVID-19 shutdowns or staff restrictions. So to give a little deeper dive on these services and how we facilitate them, our federal criminal and civil searches are done through the PACER system. That gives us direct link access to the U.S. appellate courts, the U.S. district courts, and also to U.S. bankruptcy records. We also have our sex offender registration searches that many clients ask us to fulfill as part of their background screening programs. Those include our United States Sex Offender Registry Database, which affords information on all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and also several U.S. territories. In addition to the National Sex Offender Registry, we also have direct state, individual state sex offender registry searches that are available. We also have several proprietary national criminal databases that we utilize, depending on what a specific client's needs for information are. And those, kind of overriding structure of these databases is that they all contain somewhere around about 50 billion records per database. And they all, and each one of them contains a little bit different data, but most of them contain, conviction information, pending cases, wants and warrants. They also contain information on U.S. and international sanctions databases, like your debarment list, global watch list, and sanctions databases like OIG and GSA. We also have our statewide criminal records databases. These databases afford direct access to the courts, and some of them are also records repositories and government-owned databases. These databases do vary state to state somewhat in the type of information that they provide, but they are all great resources for obtaining criminal information. In addition to that, we also have our county criminal record searches. And as I mentioned before, several of the courts afford us direct online access directly into those court records. That type of access is primarily available in metropolitan areas. And this next slide kind of gives you an idea of the mix of the research options that we have available to us. So currently, about 60% of our criminal records county criminal records that we process are processed via online research. We have approximately another 15% that is facilitated via clerk-assisted research, and another 25% that is done by on-site terminals. And I'm going to take a moment to kind of explain to you a little bit more about the clerk-assisted research and the on-site terminal research. So when we are facilitating a county criminal record search, here is kind of a high-level overview of our process. Our internal team basically looks at the request that comes over and identifies which counties we need to search. At that point, they make a determination on whether that is a court that we have direct access to, and if so, then one of our in-house researchers handles that research. If it is not a direct request that one of our in-house researchers can handle, then we basically dispatch that to one of our field researchers. Our field researchers either then facilitate the request either through a clerk-assisted record search or by accessing or basically by going into the court and utilizing one of the public access terminals to do that research. And whether we use the clerk-assisted or public access terminal is completely dependent on how that particular court operates. Once they've obtained those records, they then transmit them back into our processing team, who then, puts that information into the background screening report. And in other words, that information then populates that background screening report with the data that we've achieved. So a little bit about those two on-site research scenarios. For a clerk-assisted research, basically what happens is one of our researchers basically goes up to the clerk records window and provides that clerk with a list of names and identifying information for different individuals that we are processing screens on, and then that court clerk records manager basically then provides that the research on those particular subjects back to our court researcher. Some of the delays or some of the restrictions that we're seeing due to COVID is obviously if a court is denying access to the public during COVID closures, then our ability to get that information can become limited. Sometimes they're reducing down the number of requests that we can make at a single time, which slows our researchers down some. In other situations, we have situations where they're not providing access at all. When we're talking about our court researchers using those public data terminals, again, if there is a restriction in physical access to those terminals because a court has basically shuttered its doors to the external public, then that can cause a delay. Or if they are keeping that area open, but they're practicing social distancing, they may be limiting a much smaller number of researchers into that area at one time to conduct research, which also can potentially cause some delays and slow the process down. Another situation where there might be a delay experienced is when we're required to do extended research or when we're required to do a court record confirmation. Generally, the situations where we're required to do one of these two, we're required to facilitate one of these two processes is if we've had a database or records repository search that's returned a record requiring direct court record research to confirm the status of that case or its reportability within municipal, state, or federal reporting guidelines, then we would need to do extended research. If we have a situation where we've done a database search and that database search returns a record with very limited qualifiers, maybe we only have a name match, and maybe it's just limited factors of the person's name. In other words, maybe first name, last name, and only middle initial, and we need more information to confirm that this record does belong to the client's applicant. Then we might be in a situation where we need to do extended research and actually pull that court record. In another situation where we might find a situation where we have to do extended research is when the direct court search only provides an abstract, and we also need to pull the case to ensure that both it is a match to the applicant and that the information contained within that record is reportable within federal FCRA guidelines, state guidelines, municipal guidelines. Currently, only about 10%, there's also a situation, in the situation of confirming database records or having to do extended research for other purposes, only about 10% of the records that we process require us to do confirmation or extended research. So it really only impacts about 10% of the files that we have coming in that contain criminal records. Please note that another area that we might see a delay is in reinvestigations. And again, because reinvestigations, and that a reinvestigation occurs when an applicant contacts us and says, you reported something on my background screen that I believe doesn't belong to me, or the information is not the exact status of the case, or something of that nature. For those reinvestigations, it's very common for us to have to do extended research, so those processes could potentially be delayed as well. As I talk about these delays, and before I go into the employment verifications, I do want to note that we look at what our delay percentages are on a daily basis. And since this COVID crisis began, and since we started seeing the shutdowns, we are only experiencing about 5% of the files having a delay on them based upon a COVID issue. So at this point, the impact has been extremely minimal. So in providing you some information on our employment screening verification process, because employment verifications are another area where we could potentially see some delays based upon COVID closures. Currently, when we do an employment verification, our verifier looks at basically looks at the employer to be verified. If we either already have it on a list of known employers that utilize verification of employment databases, or once we reach out to that employer, we're directed that they use a VOE database. And so in that situation, we would go ahead and verify the employment through the VOE database that they currently use. Obviously, the Work Number is one of the biggest ones that are out there, but there's a whole plethora of different verification of employment databases that and services that employers utilize. If we are able to verify it through the employment database, then we're able to very quickly provide those results. If it is an employer direct search, there's a lot of employers who are still functioning. They've also executed their contingency plans. They have workers working at home, or HR staff and staff that supplies employment records working from home, and they have access to their online systems, and we're still getting a huge amount of those employment verifications completed. So obviously the other piece of that process would be that we would directly verify at the employer. Once we have obtained the information, we obviously transmit that information into our platform, and it falls into the background screening report. So just to give you high level, a little bit of an idea of what our mix is as far as the records that we receive that we're verifying, about 37% of employment verifications can be facilitated through a VOE database. The other 63% require us to actually do online, or basically do research directly with the organization. So the education verification process is very similar to the employment verification process. The only difference is that certain institutions use records repository databases. The biggest one obviously is the Student Clearinghouse. And so if an institution uses the clearinghouse, then we obtain records directly through that clearinghouse. If the institution holds the records directly, then we would verify through the institution and then transmit those records, into our platform and finalize them by inputting them into the report. Currently, we have about 46% of our records that can be verified through records database. We have about 54% of our reports that actually are of our verifications that we actually do directly with the schools. And please note that while a lot of the schools are currently closed to both student and faculty access, many of these schools are keeping their administration offices open. and that's in the higher education spectrum. And in the primary and secondary, the school districts are maintaining their district offices open, and a lot of the individual schools are also keeping their admissions and standard office staff in place, obviously practicing social distancing and all the other protocols that have been recommended by the CDC. And so we are finding that we're still able to do a large number of those verifications directly through those sources. And again, that that 5% figure that I provided to you earlier, that covers employment verifications, education verifications, and criminal verification and criminal record searches that have COVID-19 impacts to them. So still a very small number. And will we likely see that number, go up and down as this virus kind of makes its way into different areas of the United States? Absolutely. And we will constantly keep clients abreast of, if we're seeing, any spikes in the number of delays. That's something we'll definitely convey to our clients. So how do we notify you of delays? I know that some other background screening companies have actually been putting out lists of closures. We feel like that would be extremely overwhelming to clients. Not only is it overwhelming, it's not 100% accurate because, while all the schools may be closed in a certain state, obviously that doesn't always impact the ability to get background screens completed within those states. And so we feel like the best way to notify our clients, especially considering that 5% figure that we discussed earlier, is to notify them directly through the background screening file. And so if you have a potential COVID delay, what you're going to see on your individual background screening file is that you will have a client message, and that client message will, under your status bar, it'll say client message. If you look down into the individual search results, you will see client message next to the individual component. If you go ahead and click on that component, you will then see a message within the component. Then that message will read this exact, will have this exact data in it, that we are unable to process this search at time due to court, school, and/or employer closures, and that we will process this search once the impacted source is available. We are using a standardized message for this, and the reason why is because that allows us to specifically track any delays that are related to COVID, and to then be able to help employers better find alternative methods if it's very critical to get that applicant on the job and get them onboarded and through background screening processing. We can potentially help you find other ways of doing that to give you the information you need to make hiring decisions. So we do realize that there are certain essential services that are extremely impacted at this time, and those essential services obviously have been defined by each state in their safer at home orders. And so as additional support to our clients, we would like to offer to our clients the option of requesting rush service at no additional charge for files that are for essential workers that are that need to be placed quickly based upon the COVID crisis. And so if you would like a waiver of cost on a file, just simply put that in the notes to us, and we will go ahead and make sure that we withhold that $15 rush file fee for that file. What rush service does is it basically puts that file at the head of the line in each one of our departments and through each process. It also, we also notify our field researchers if it does require field research that it is a rush, it is a rush file. There's a sense of urgency on it, and they similarly treat it with special care. So, and as always, our client relations team is here to help you. Our account management team and sales teams are here to help you and partner with you. And so please reach out to us directly if there's any way we can assist you through this crisis. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and open it up for panel discussion and turn it back over to Heidi and Danielle.
Thank you, Cynthia. We will now dedicate the remainder of the webinar to addressing attendee questions. We have Nancy Golden, AccuSource's Vice President of Operations and Compliance, and Jennifer Damon, AccuSource's Director of Compliance and Chief Privacy Officer, here to answer your questions. Thank you for joining us, Nancy and Jennifer. If you have not yet had a chance to ask a question via the question pane, please feel free to do so now.
Thanks, Heidi. The first question is with FCR regulations, aren't those records to be verified with the courts? If the courthouse is closed, the proprietary database, does it still show?
Hi, Danielle. Can you please repeat that question? I don't think I completely followed.
Sure. It says, with FCR regulations, aren't those records to be verified with the courts? If the courthouse is closed, the proprietary database, does it still show?
Yes. So the information, if we're talking about criminal records and we're talking about reporting a case, yes, that information would be information that does come from the court. We can electronically access many court records directly with the court, and depending on where that search is being conducted, if it is being conducted in a place where we can do an electronic search, that information would be validated at the court, and it would be following the FCRA guidelines and ensuring that we're gathering the appropriate number of identifiers before reporting a case.
Fantastic. In the case of school closures impacting the education verifications, how frequent is AccuSource looking at the pending files and following up to see if the specific institution is back in operation?
So we're actually looking at those files daily. We are also notating the reopen dates. Many of the schools have provided us with a date that they're intending on reopening. Now we know that that is a moving target. A lot of schools have set one date and moved that date further back. So we are just revising our notations and following up on those given dates, just to make sure that we're trying to catch someone at the school when they reopen, in addition to contacting the school directly in the instance of like a high school verification, we're also checking the district office. So that's another source where records may be housed, where they may have folks working that we can get the information. So we're checking both of those sources, and if neither one of those are available because they have closed both, then typically we have a date they're scheduled to reopen, and we are following up on those files daily.
Okay. Another education question is, I received information indicating all schools in Arizona are closed. Are you still able to get education verifications from Arizona?
We are. So that's one of the things, depending on what type of verification we're doing. If it's a high school verification, we will reach out to the school. And like I was just sharing, a lot of the schools are closed. So as a secondary measure, we will follow up with the district and then notate those files and then follow up when they're scheduled to be reopened. However, in the instance of colleges, most of the colleges utilize an electronic database. I'm sure most of you are familiar with a National Student Clearinghouse. Those records are still available. So we are searching those records and being able to report that information. However, in the instance where there may be additional research required, which does happen on a small fraction of those files, those would be delayed because we are needing additional research being conducted. And if there's no one at the school, then that would be delayed. But we would notate that information. But for the most part, we can get the college information.
Okay. The next question, I heard that the state of New York and most public offices are shut down. Is it still possible to get criminal records from New York?
It is. New York is one of those states. They have an electronic system, so we're able to access that information. As Cynthia shared earlier in the presentation, there's multiple ways in which to gather criminal record information, and one of those is a direct electronic connection. And so that is something we would be able to search and provide results on.
Okay. The next question is, can we then assume that if the generic message mentioned earlier is still on the specific file, means that there is no new updates?
That is correct. So that information will remain in place until we're able to get the information. But please know, as I stated earlier, we are following up on those given reopen dates that were being provided, and that's for schools and for courts, because for the courts that are closing their access, where we have to do a clerk assisted search or we have to do an in-person search, we are getting information when they're scheduled to reopen. But again, that is also a moving target, just like the schools, but we are following up on those given dates to see if they're reopened, to obtain the information and to get those files updated for you.
All right. I have a candidate I need to onboard quickly, but their background screen report indicates that there is a delay in one of the counties where they previously resided. What should I do?
Your best bet would be to contact AccuSource to see what we can do to help. Because while you may have a county criminal search that you've processed, and that county may be closed or unavailable at the time, there are a couple other things we could look at. We could look to see, is there an available statewide in that given area where we're searching? Did you run a national criminal database search? So there's other sources we can use to help fill some of that gap to get you to a place that you might be able to make a hiring decision contingent upon being able to go back and run that direct court clerk search once the court opens. So that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is whether or not you want to look at that file and make a decision, depending on how urgent that position may be, make a decision on whether or not you want to move forward with that applicant contingent upon the background check when it comes back. And I'm not sure if Jen was able to pop on the call. I know she was having a technical difficulty, but she might be able to shed some light on the other side of that, as far as you know, obviously you'll want to check with your legal folks to see that you want to be making that decision.
I believe Jennifer is still experiencing technical difficulties,
Okay.
so in the event that we need her legal expertise, feel free to send those questions to marketing at accusource-online.com and we'll get those answered for you. It looks like we're at the end of our last question, so if any of you have any additional questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to do so in the chat option. The last question that we have here for now is, we do pre-employment drug testing. Can I still send applicants to be tested?
That's a great question. And actually, I'm going to defer that to Cynthia. I think she's got a little bit more insight than I do, and she probably can give the best answer. Cynthia, would you mind?
No, not at all. So we are monitoring our labs very closely, and the great thing is both LabCorp and Quest are putting out quite a bit of COVID alerts and providing additional information. It is our understanding that the majority, if not all, patient or PSC and third-party collection facilities are, preferred third-party collection facilities are currently open and allowing people to come in and test. I do suggest, if possible, utilizing the scheduling option with those individual facilities to make sure that there's, you're not forced into a situation where you have to wait outside for a period of time, just because they are also practicing social distancing and only allowing a certain number of people in the building at a certain specific time period. Do know that all of those drug tests are actually tested, all urine and oral saliva drug tests are processed at a different lab facility than where they are currently processing the COVID test. COVID tests are actually processed at the various labs, infectious disease laboratories. And so there is, they're completely tested separately. So there is no impact, the one is not impacting the other. As this thing continues to progress, could we potentially see a situation where labs start to shift resources from one facility to the other? That is always a possibility. But as it is right now, we're not seeing any delays in those processing.
Thank you. So we are almost at the end of our time, Jennifer and Nancy and Cynthia. This will be our final live question. Again, attendees, if you entered a question or if you have not submitted a question and you didn't have the opportunity to address it live, our team will follow up with you directly post-webinar to provide an answer. The last question is It was stated earlier that county criminal search was impacted. So is this only for the public research?
So it would be counties where they require public researchers or court clerk assisted research, and it would be contingent upon whether or not that court is closed. Not all courts are closed across the land, but for those courts that are closed, that would be impacted. So our recommendation is if you have a candidate you need to get pushed through, give us a call and let us see what we can do to help you, because we can certainly share what other alternative options may be available that you could consider to get that pushed through.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia, for facilitating this informative webinar, and special thanks to our attendees for joining us today. I also want to thank Nancy and Jennifer for lending their expertise as panelists for today's presentation. To recap, a link to the recording of the presentation will be sent to each attendee within 24 hours. Please also feel free to visit the resource section of our website at www.accusource-online.com, where you will find our full webinar library as well as other valuable compliance and educational resources. If you have any additional questions, please contact us at marketing@accusource-online.com. On behalf of the AccuSource team, we wish you all an enjoyable day.